Transformational grammar. Though we have seen that there is a lot of change, what Chomsky said in 50s and what he says now. But even then, we need to understand his theory of grammar to be able to understand how language works. In linguistic transformational grammar, or TG, or transformational generative grammar, TGG, is part of the theory of generative grammar, especially of natural languages. It considers grammar to be a system of rules that generate exactly those combinations of words that form grammatically correct sentences in a given language and involve the use of defined operations called transformation to produce new sentences, as he plays cricket is produced and as passive cricket is played, right? So the theory largely originated and developed by Noam Chomsky. It is without question that most influential theory of linguistics in modern times, and one that no serious scholar can afford to skip or neglect. But the student of TG will often experience frustration and puzzlement, for it is a curious mixture of quite brilliant insights and of complex technical but often seemingly artificial devices. If we already are not aware of what he said in his early works, will be in difficulty of understanding what he says, what he's saying in his recent works. The primary literature, apart from Chomsky's syntactic structures, the first published work in 50s, is often difficult to read, and its full intelligibility depends on knowing what is said in the background, as I just said. The notion of PS grammar, obviously a lot of work in PS grammar is from him. Much of what was said comes from Chomsky's work, but his fame does not rest on it. Much more important is the notion of transformation, together with the ideas that are associated with it or have developed out of a transformationally based theory. Although syntactic structures 57 first introduced the word to important theory, the logical structure of linguistic theory, which was not published until 18 years later, was written some years before it. The theory was undoubtedly revolutionary and even greeted with total skepticism by many scholars, but as with all revolutions, some of it had been foreshadowed in earlier work, particularly of Chomsky's teacher, Zelling-Harris. Chomsky was has considerably modified his ideas since 57, as I just said, and in his philosophical views has vastly distanced himself from the structuralist, the American structuralist, and indeed from the whole of the empiricist tradition. Undoubtedly the best known, in some ways nearest and most discussed theoretical position is that of aspects of theory of syntax, a position that Chomsky himself has called the standard theory. So with the passage of time, he's distant from what he said earlier. This introduction and expounded the notion of deep structure, an essential part of the theory. So this the standard theory introduced and expounded the notion of deep structure, which is an essential part of this theory. Several important changes were made in 1970s to produce the extended standard theory. Chomsky's position at the beginning of the in 80s is to be found in lectures on government and binding. So there has been a change right from the beginning till even today. Development of basic concepts. Though transformations continue to be important in Chomsky's current theory, he has now abandoned the original notion of deep structure and the surface structure. Initially, two additional levels of representation were introduced: LF logical form and PF phonetic form. So they are replaced, not fully replaced, but they are now introduced. But in 70s, Chomsky sketched out a new program of research and minimalism, in which deep structure and surface structure were introduced with D structure and were introduced with PF and LF. To complicate the understanding of the development of Chomsky's theories, the precise meaning of deep structure and surface structure have changed over time, though they need to be understood because to understand whole of Chomsky's work, we also need to what he said in his earlier works. By 70s, they were normally referred to simply as D structure and S structure by Chomskyan linguists. In particular, the idea that the meaning of a sentence was determined by its deep structure, taken to its logical conclusion by the generative semanticists during the same period, was dropped for good by Chomskyan linguists when LF took over this rule. So now this many of the thoughts of his early theories are changed with the new terminology. Previously, Chomsky and Ray Jekendorf had begun to argue that meaning was determined by both deep structure and surface structure. But now, as we said that these are replaced with the new terminology, and now he uses new terminology to give his theory.